12 minutes. That is the entire window 50 Cent needed to turn a pool video into a public autopsy. Not 12 hours. Not 12 days. 12 minutes between the moment Rick Ross pressed record beside a swimming pool in Miami and the moment 50 Cent typed 3 letters that ended the round. LOL. And if you think this story is really about an album called Set in Stone, you are already looking in the wrong direction. Because what nobody in the hip-hop press has told you yet is that the pool video, the shirtless yelling, the government name reveal, the Shreveport misdirection, the 20 features that could not push past 10,000 copies, the Frontier flight, the $35 million mortgage on a $35 million house, and the sudden quiet inside the Maybach music office are all pieces of the same puzzle. And the puzzle is not a beef. The puzzle is a slow, surgical dismantling that started years ago, executed by a man who stopped rapping and started collecting paperwork. Sit down. Lock the door. Because the version of this story that has been floating across timelines for the last week is the sanitized one. And the sanitized one is missing the part that actually matters. Now let us reset the room. Because before anybody understands why 50 Cent laughed instead of typing a paragraph, everybody has to understand what 50 Cent actually is in 2026, and what Rick Ross actually is in 2026, because these are not the same men who traded shots in 2008. In 2008, this was 2 rappers fighting over a mixtape crown, over street clout, over who could sell more units at a Best Buy in Queens or a Sam Goody in Miami Gardens. In 2026, one of these men owns 4 spin-off television franchises, controls a spirits portfolio that moves 9 figures a year, sits on a $124 million entertainment development contract with the state of Louisiana, holds ribbon-cutting keys to a film and television campus in Shreveport, and has quietly repositioned inside a Manhattan office that looks less like a rap label and more like a Warner Brothers subsidiary. That man is 50 Cent. The other man owns a beautiful Georgia estate that costs almost $1 million a year to keep the lights on, owns a Star Island mansion that has been refinanced 3 separate times in 3 years, owns a champagne endorsement that Rick Ross has been the public face of for 13 straight years without a single publicly disclosed equity percentage, and owns an album called Set in Stone that came out with 20 features and could not crack the number that a mid-tier SoundCloud rapper hits. From a bedroom. That man is Rick Ross. Same beef. Different weight class. Completely different sport. And here is the detail nobody wants to say out loud. The wound is not the album. The wound is the wings. Watch the tape back. Freeze it at the pool. Because when 50 Cent typed the joke about tickets that do not sell and albums that do not move, so you have to promote car shows and sell chicken wings, Rick Ross did not respond the same day, did not respond the same night, did not respond the next morning. Rick Ross responded after the wings joke landed and metastasized across every group chat in hip-hop. That is not a coincidence. That is a psychological tell. That is the exact moment somebody stops being a rapper and starts being a defendant. The album jokes were absorbable. The album jokes could be waved away with a talk of streaming eras and playlist algorithms and Drake fanbases refusing to spin the record. But the wings joke pierced somewhere else. The wings joke touched the pivot. The wings joke reminded everybody that the reason the small business exists is because the big business stopped feeding. And once 50 Cent found that button, 50 Cent has been pressing it every single day since, and Rick Ross has been reacting like clockwork. Let us walk this back to the numbers, because the numbers are the only witness in this courtroom that cannot be intimidated. Set in Stone dropped. 20 features. 20. Meek Mill on it. Whale on it. Jadakiss on it. A stacked deck across 2 coasts and multiple generations of the roster. And the album debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200 with 19,000 equivalent album units in the first week. 19,000. Split across 20 features means every guest verse pulled the average of 950 units of contribution. That is not an album cycle. That is a group text that got monetized. And before Billboard even confirmed the official figure, a viral rumor was already screaming through the culture that Set in Stone had moved only 2,000 pure copies out of the gate. Whether that specific number was verifiable or not stopped matching the moment 50 Cent screenshotted a caption and wrote, quote, laughing out loud, "The jig is up. 20 features under 10,000 sales. Damn boy, it is over." That caption traveled faster than any single from Set in Stone ever did. That caption became the album's real marketing campaign. And the tragedy is that 50 Cent did not write a diss record to accomplish it. 50 Cent wrote a caption. Because when 50 Cent operates on this level, weapons that used to require a studio session now fit inside a phone screen. But here is where the story gets darker. And here is where every other breakdown you have watched this week stops short. Because the caption is the surface. The caption is the shrapnel. The bomb was planted years ago. Rewind to a Patrick Bet-David podcast. Rick Ross sits down in front of millions of viewers. Camera lights hot. And Rick Ross says, quote, 50 doesn't own his music, doesn't own the show power, lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, isn't making real money. Then Rick Ross throws in a yacht joke about 50 Cent needing to strap on scuba gear and scrub the bottom of a boat. And Rick Ross walks off that stage feeling like a scoreboard just changed. But somewhere in a corner office in Manhattan, an entirely different scoreboard was already running. Because a man who has actually built a media empire does not respond to accusations of not owning his empire by tweeting back. A man who has actually built a media empire responds by opening a folder, pulling out the paperwork, and letting the paperwork breathe on its own timeline. And that is exactly what happened. Every claim Rick Ross made on that podcast broke against a wall of public record within weeks. 50 Cent does not own Power. Power is a franchise that has spawned 4 separate spin-off series, every single one produced through G-Unit Film and Television, every single one generating recurring back-end revenue for 50 Cent as an owner, not as a performer, not as a face for hire. When the Star's contract closed in September of 2022, 50 Cent posted the date to the internet with a caption that read, "Official day of really owning my content." That was not a boast. That was a receipt. 50 Cent doesn't own Masters? The Masters conversation for a man who took equity in Vitamin Water in 2004 and cashed a payout estimated between $60 and $100 million when Coca-Cola bought the parent company is a conversation Rick Ross should not have voluntarily entered. That deal is the reason 50 Cent survived a bankruptcy filing in 2015 and came out on the other side owning the very television franchise Rick Ross said 50 Cent doesn't own. 50 Cent lives in a 2-bedroom apartment? Architectural Digest. Adjacent coverage from August of 2024 showed marble floors, a spa, a cold plunge, and an indoor lap pool inside 50 Cent's current residence. The 2-bedroom line was a snapshot Rick Ross grabbed from a moment in 2020 and tried to freeze into permanent fact. But permanent fact is a hard thing to fake when the other side has documentation. Now flip the camera. Because the camera has to be flipped. The Star Island mansion Rick Ross bought in August of 2023 for $35 million, negotiated down from a $37.5 million asking price. The same day of purchase, $20 million was borrowed against the property. In July of 2024, an additional $4.3 million was borrowed. In March of 2026, another $10.7 million was borrowed. The math adds up to a total mortgage of $35 million against a house that cost $35 million. The deal Rick Ross negotiated on paper is now fully mortgaged back to the original ask. In late 2024, the Georgia Department of Revenue filed a $65,000 state tax execution against Rick Ross. A 2021 child support filing obtained by TMZ listed monthly income at $585,000 and ordered $11,000 a month in support. An older 2009 filing that 50 Cent famously aired on the radio showed Rick Ross admitting on paper to spending $7,000 a month more than Rick Ross earned. That paperwork is not a rumor. That paperwork is a court exhibit. And the 12-year-old Luke Belair endorsement, the champagne brand Rick Ross helped build into a cultural institution across 13 years of loyalty, has never disclosed a publicly verifiable equity percentage for Rick Ross. 13 years of face time, and the ownership terms are a black box. Compare that to vitamin water, where every $50 cent earned lies inside a transaction that was publicly reported by every major business outlet on the planet. That is the entire chessboard. And Rick Ross walked onto a podcast and called check on a game where Rick Ross was already down the queen, both rooks, and a knight. Now here comes the part that turns this from a beef into a case study. Because there is a whisper moving through boardrooms this month, and the whisper is not a diss track. The whisper is a corporate paper trail. According to industry-side reporting circulating in real time, an investment vehicle tied to 50 Cent has been quietly acquiring distressed debt portfolios previously held by a former distribution partner that once carried Maybach Music Group's back catalog obligations. Shell entities registered across Delaware, Wyoming, and the Cayman Islands. Layered ownership structures that would make a private equity attorney whistle. And the implication of that acquisition, if the paperwork holds up to daylight, is staggering. Because when the person mocking your album from a caption is the same person who owns the debt behind your touring apparatus, the beef stops being a beef. The beef becomes a garnishment. The beef becomes a collection notice with a laughing emoji taped to the top. If Rick Ross tours, revenue flows through channels that a creditor can touch. If Rick Ross cancels, venue bonds and promoter deposits take a hit. There is no third door. This is the game of chess where every piece Rick Ross moves is already covered by a piece 50 Cent placed on the board 4 years ago. And this is why the pool video felt so off. Because from the outside it looked like anger. From the inside, if you know what to listen for, it sounded like panic. Rick Ross was not defending an album on that live stream. Rick Ross was defending a business model that has been quietly encircled for years. Rick Ross said, quote, "Give them people they money back, Curtis." But nobody in Shreveport is asking for money back. G-Unit Film and Television Studios is a working campus. Real productions. Real payroll. Real tax credits. Real infrastructure inside a Louisiana city that needed the investment. When friction with local officials appears, when paperwork misaligns with promises, a smart operator pulls back exposure until alignment returns. That is not theft. That is fiduciary discipline. Somebody who has never sat on the ownership side of a 9-figure operating agreement does not intuitively understand that. Somebody who has been renting relevance through endorsements does not intuitively understand that. And when Rick Ross yelled the government name Curtis on camera, Rick Ross was not landing a punch. Rick Ross was announcing to the internet that Rick Ross had run out of business ammunition and was reaching for the personal drawer. Here is another detail almost nobody has connected. Rick Ross rode a Frontier Airlines flight 3 weeks before the album dropped. Cell phone cameras captured Rick Ross boarding a commercial aircraft. The internet did what the internet does. The Rick Ross team responded that the private jet was in the shop receiving a $500,000 Starlink upgrade. Maybe true. Very possibly true. But timing is a witness that never lies. When somebody already carrying a $35 million mortgage on a Star Island property, refinanced 3 times, plus a Georgia estate that costs $1 million a year to operate, plus a jet with roughly $1.6 million in annual operating costs at 400 flight hours, plus a lifestyle that requires visible wealth maintenance across every social media impression, suddenly shows up in a Frontier boarding line. The timing does not read like a maintenance window. The timing reads like a cash flow question. And cash flow questions do not shout. Cash flow questions whisper. Which is exactly what everybody in the industry has been doing about this situation for months. Now let us name the 5 stages that Rick Ross is publicly cycling through, because 50 Cent already mapped the entire journey inside a single caption drop. Stage 1, denial. That was the silence in the first days after the set in stone numbers leaked. Stage 2, bargaining. That was every attempt to reframe the numbers as an artifact of streaming eras and hostile playlist algorithms. Stage 3, anger. That is the pool video. That is the shirtless yelling. That is the Curtis. That is Shreveport as a deflection totem. That is the shot at 50 Cent's alleged living arrangement. And anger, in the psychology of public conflict, is the loudest and weakest stage. Because winners do not yell. Winners do not need to film live streams in swimwear. Winners smile. Winners screenshot. Winners caption. Winners keep it moving. Stage 4 is depression. That is the coming stage. That is when the pool videos stop, when the phone goes quiet, when appearances get quietly rescheduled, when the tour dates begin sliding on the calendar without an official announcement. And stage 5 is acceptance. That is the stage where Rick Ross returns to a microphone, respects the score, and stops swinging at a battle that was measured out years ago in a boardroom Rick Ross was never invited into. But here is what makes 50 Cent uniquely dangerous inside a Stage 3 environment. 50 Cent has spent 20 years perfecting the choreography of somebody else's anger. Ja Rule in 2003, Stage 3. Rick Ross the first time around in 2008, Stage 3. Every attempted challenger who ever tried to run a play on 50 Cent, Stage 3. And 50 Cent has never lost inside a Stage 3 environment. Because 50 Cent does not participate in Stage 3. 50 Cent produces Stage 3. 50 Cent sits inside an air-conditioned room, fully clothed, phone in hand, caption ready, LOL loaded, and lets the opponent do all of the sweating, all of the yelling, all of the reaching. All 50 Cent has to do is screenshot the opponent's own material and repost it with 3 letters. That is the entire operation. Screenshot, caption, post, laugh, repeat. And every screenshot compounds like interest inside a savings account that 50 Cent has been depositing into since the Ja Rule era. There is one more piece of this puzzle nobody has assembled correctly, and it is the piece that turns this from a beef breakdown into a warning to the entire music industry. Because the mechanism 50 Cent is running against Rick Ross is not a one-off. It is a template. It is a reproducible corporate procedure that can be executed against any legacy artist whose lifestyle economics have outscaled recurring cash flow. Any veteran act who spent the last decade financing visibility instead of building ownership. Any name brand rapper whose brand endorsements are opaque, whose real estate is over-leveraged, whose tour dependencies rely on venue partnerships that can be politely encouraged to reconsider a booking. And there is a growing list of legacy artists who fit that description. Rick Ross is not the first candidate that this template could reach. Rick Ross is simply the loudest, and therefore the first public demonstration. The next few months will reveal whether other high-visibility, high-liability legacy names get quietly nudged into similar corners. Because the mechanism only requires 2 ingredients. Ingredient 1, a target with visible wealth exceeding actual wealth. Ingredient 2, an operator with patience, capital, and a working knowledge of debt instruments. 50 Cent has spent a full decade quietly acquiring ingredient 2. And ingredient 1 is available in surplus across the industry right now. Zoom back out. Because the audience needs to understand the full weight of what actually happened this week. Rick Ross recorded a video in a pool, shirt off, yelling a government name. 50 Cent typed 3 letters. And inside those 3 letters was a decade of legal preparation, a decade of business architecture, a decade of ownership accumulation, and a decade of watching, waiting, and never once flinching from the long game. The pool video will be forgotten by Christmas. The Wings jokes will fade by spring. But the corporate paper trail attached to this exchange will still be filed and dated inside a corporate registry somewhere in Delaware, still generating ownership advantage, still reshaping the balance of who actually controls the pipelines that push hip-hop through the culture. And the reason 50 Cent laughed instead of writing a paragraph is because the paragraph was already written. In legal documents, in equity structures, in production contracts, in development deals, in shell corporations layered like Russian dolls across 3 separate jurisdictions. The caption is the punchline. The mechanism is the joke. And Rick Ross is the audience that did not realize the show was already over. Nobody flinches inside a story like this except the person still swinging at shadows. And Rick Ross, standing shirtless in a Miami pool at high noon, yelling into a camera lens about giving people their money back, was swinging at the shadow of a man who quietly bought the pool water years ago. That is the truth every rap blog is dancing around this week. That is the truth that turns 3 letters into a scoreboard. That is the truth 50 Cent understood the moment 50 Cent stopped trying to be the best rapper in the room and started trying to be the only owner in the room. Everybody else in this generation of hip-hop is renting relevance. 50 Cent has been buying the building. Rick Ross is only the first tenant to notice the locks have already been changed. And if the paper trail continues to surface the way industry insiders are quietly suggesting it will, the next few names on the list are going to wish somebody had warned them before the eviction notice arrived taped to a laughing emoji. Because the round is over. The album is buried. The pool is drying. And the caption still stands. LOL. 3 letters. 1 scoreboard. 0 flinches. Game. One final closing thought for anybody still catching up in the back of the room. The Rick Ross vs. 50 Cent exchange in the summer of 2026 is not a spectator sport. It is a live case study on the difference between renting relevance and owning infrastructure. Rick Ross rented relevance for a full decade of luxury imagery, financed appearances, endorsement handshakes, and estate photography that photographed beautifully but never generated recurring compounding equity. 50 Cent, quietly, methodically, and unglamorously, bought ownership stakes across television, spirits, real estate, media production, film financing, and legal debt instruments, while the culture assumed 50 Cent had gone dormant. The Set in Stone album cycle simply provided the calendar date on which the imbalance became publicly visible. And the pool videos simply provided the visual thumbnail future business students will attach to the case file. Everybody watching this unfold should be taking notes, because the mechanism does not care about musical talent, does not care about lyrical skill, does not care about legacy respect, does not care about street tenure, and does not care about who had the harder run in 1998 or the bigger hit in 2006. The mechanism only cares about paperwork. And paperwork does not sleep, does not blink, does not attend award shows, and does not respond to captions. Paperwork simply files. And every time paperwork files, another layer of leverage locks into place. Rick Ross is discovering, in real time, on camera, in a swimming pool, that the paperwork 50 Cent filed years ago has now grown teeth. And teeth do not laugh. Teeth chew.